Hey guys, it's Selwen here. Today, to finish off the Decay guides, let's talk about its tank spec, Blood. Blood as a tank mitigates damage a little bit differently than most tanks, primarily through self-healing, coming from death strikes, among other passive damage reductions like Bone Shield and other forms of self-heal. This has its own cons and benefits, leading to your HP acting as a form of ping-pong, going up and down as you get hit and self-heal. Even though it is generally a quite slow tank in terms of movement, it brings a lot in a form of unique utility such as grips, massively improving your mob control in content like dungeons. Probably the best part about Blood tanking. Due to your self-healing nature and cooldowns, you also have the perfect kit to sustain yourself for a pretty decent amount of time. Your resources here, like all Decay specs, are made up of runes and runic power, which kinda feed off each other. Most abilities are gonna cost you these runes, which in turn builds runic power, which are generally spent on those death strikes. But before we get to all of your abilities, priorities, and go over how your mitigation works, let's talk talents. So on the tier 1 we get Blood Drinker, generally the go-to choice for most situations, be AoE or single target. It deals a pretty hefty amount of damage for 3 seconds, plus healing you for the same amount. Now the others have their own uses, like Heartbreaker, making your heart strike generate 2 additional runic power per target hit. So on top of the 10 from its rune cost and a bonus 5 from the ability itself, giving a total of 17 runic power on one target and up to 25 on 5 targets. So on Mythic Plus, this can be great, but at the same time, you're not always gonna be facing against 5 trash pack groups, making the worth of the talent a little bit less. But if you're craving for that runic power, go ahead, especially if things like Teaming and Fortified are up that week. Rune Strike has a similar use to Heartbreaker, helping with your resources. This time is an extra ability to give you a rune back, plus its cooldown gets reduced by 1 second per rune spent. Now what it does can be useful, really good in fact, if you're going full on defensive, providing more runes, which equals more mitigation in the end. Personally though, I don't like having to lose a global cooldown to use it. I just don't enjoy the mechanic itself, but try it out for yourself and see if you prefer it over Blood Drinker. Tier 2 is a bit of an odd one. Hemostasis makes your blood boil, so your filler and main AoE ability essentially provide a buff anytime it hits an enemy, improving the damage and healing of your next death strike by 8%, stacking up to 5 times, making this the best talent for everything in this tier, also making the others practically obsolete. Both of the other two help in AoE, but generally not that worth it, although if you only looking for damage in AoE, they can be of some worth, still providing some defensive use in the form of their self-healing, but they are mostly trivial. And following tier, Ossuary is usually the go-to. While you have at least 5 Bone Shield charges, the cost of Death Strike is reduced by 5, plus your maximum runic power is increased by 10, overall providing more Death Strikes to be usable. And the cap increase allows you to bank an extra Death Strike, but more on that later. As for Fall Bulwark, will increase your HP based on the Bone Shield charges as well. It's alright if you happen to need a bigger HP pool for some reason, but comparing to Ossuary, not really worth it. And Tombstone has its niche use as well, consumes up to 5 Bone Shield charges to grant you 6 runic power and a shield to absorb 6% of your maximum HP per charge, so you can serve as an extra mitigation ability with some sort of extra planning to make it work, especially in preparation for easy and predictable attacks coming from bosses. I don't really recommend this for beginners, but if you really like how it works, you can find some uses. And the next year we get Will of the Necropolis, reducing your damage taken by 35% when your HP is below that same amount. Works for everything, passive, so nothing that you have to do or worry about, the go-to choice. Now Rune Tap can provide the same if the fight involves a lot of predictable hits of damage where Will of the Necropolis wouldn't really work all that well, enabling you to pop it to get that 30% damage reduction for 4 seconds, which which is really freaking good. When used properly, this talent can be really amazing. As for anti-magic barrier, is more of a niche. It reduces its cooldown by 15 seconds and the amounts absorbed is increased by 30%, so more useful in magic intensive fights where you see yourself using it a lot. Next is mostly utility, so choose what you prefer. Do you prefer to have a slow for kiting in dungeons, offering a pretty good control, or have your mass grip more often? If none of those matter or work, your Wraith Walk is here for you to improve your mobility. Tier 6 Bloodworms currently is best. Basically you get these little pet worm things spawning from auto attacks. They deal some damage, plus after 15 seconds they burst, healing you for 15% of your missing HP. Or if you drop below 50% of health, they will immediately burst to heal you. So nothing too special, but provides a decent DPS increase and self-healing without messing up with your rotation. Ferocious is pretty cool, but currently not that powerful. Could get better with time, however. Basically gives you a 50% leech buff after each death strike, so all the damage that you do while that buff is up heals you for 15%. In theory, sounds great, and as gear gets better, might improve as well, but Bloodworms tends to provide the more healing overall currently. And Mark of Blood is once again weaker than Bloodworms. It's interesting as it's a debuff that you apply on an enemy, healing you anytime you get hit, but again, healing overall not that strong. And then on the last tier, Bone Storm is super cool, but only usable on AoE-like fights like Mythic Plus, costing 10 to 100 runic power more spent the longer it will last, dealing damage and healing you for 3% of your maximum HP each time it deals damage. So more mobs, the more it will heal. Red Thirst and Purgatory is then to be used in single target or when you're looking for more defensives. Red Thirst is gonna allow for more vampiric blood uses, reducing its cooldown by 1 per 10 runic power spent. Pretty self-explanatory, quite powerful as well. Purgatory is more to be used whenever you're going to play in really tough or unexpected content, like raid progress or high keys, basically giving you an extra life whenever you're about to die, so helps to recover from mistakes, while Red Thirst allows for more CD uses when you can plan them more effectively. Red Thirst is the default choice whenever Bone Storm isn't usable and you're not gonna need Purgatory. So with all of that covered, let's go over your rotation and priorities. Now before we talk the big cooldowns, let's get the general idea of how to play your Blood Decay. Blood Decay tanking is for the most part, again, all surrounding your Death Strike ability. That's how you're gonna mitigate the most damage, but before that, there is something to set up, and of course you need runic power to use it. Bone Shield is gonna be your main way to mitigate damage passively, increasing your overall armor, reducing physical damage taken, plus 10% haste. Melee attacks in turn will consume a charge, and as for the haste, is a very important stat for you. To get those bone shields, you need to use Marrow Rend. It's a biggish ability at the cost of 2 runes, generating up to 3 bone shield charges. The rules with Marrow Rend is to use whenever you don't have any bone shield charges or they are about to expire. That's priority number 1. Other uses will be a bit down in the priority list and is to maintain your stacks above 5, so whenever at 6 or close, you want to keep that ossuary buff, so you use another Marrow Rend. If not, with that talent, just keep up with the stacks. The amount generally doesn't matter as much, but outside of those situations of bone shield charges, you never really want to use Marrow Rend. As for Blood Boil, comes quickly after this, is mostly an AoE ability, but you want to use it in single target anyway, because 1, it applies your main dot, Blood Plague, which gives you a small heal as it ticks. You never really want to use Death's Caress, by the way, that only applies Blood Plague, unless you want to apply it on a faraway mob, but for the most part, ignore that ability. But attacking on a Blood Plagued target can grant Crimson Scourge proc to make your Death and Decay free, but more on that in a bit. More importantly, Blood Boil gives the Hemostasis buff to increase your Death Strike damage and heal. Now, it has 2 charges, so in single target, using it enough to keep it on cooldown will be your goal, so never let it sit at 2 charges. That said, it's also free of resources, which means it also acts as a filler when you have nothing else to click. And due to the hemostasis, sometimes you might use it a bit more often so you can stack up that buff. So that second charge, save it in preparation for some big hit, just so you can get a stronger death strike, or again when you have nothing else to click. Bloodrinker is also to be used mostly on cooldown. It's not a huge heal that you need to wait for big incoming damage, so using it as often as you can will be your goal. Even if you don't need the heal, the damage is still great. Speaking of which, the Death Strike. So Death Strikes requires runic power. Merans build some, but to effectively build more runic power will be with your Hard Strikes. They generate 15 total on just a single rune cost, so 2 Hard Strikes costing 2 runes are gonna give you 30. 10 more comparing to the Merand cost and benefit. So whenever you have those Blood Boil charges and Bone Shield stacks in check and Blood Drinker is on cooldown, you move on to those Hard Strikes to just generate runic power. In the middle of this, you do get Death and Decay procs, so those Crimson Scourge. Use them as well. You only want to use Death and Decay in single target with the proc, although they are not very important in the overall scheme of things. So the Death Strike. There's a couple of ways you want to use it. One, after taking a large hit, or your HP took a dip, because remember, Death Strike heal is not only defined by your gear and damage and those buffs, but also by the damage you took in the last 5 seconds. So timing that correctly will be key. Remember, as blood, you're self-healing the damage that you took instead of preventing it. The other simple use is of course to avoid overcapping runic power, so when close to the cap, even when you're not taking too much damage and whatnot, you'd use it anyway. But pulling in resources for heavy moments in a fight, so with those hard strikes, is also something you want to try and do with your Blood Decay. This often comes with experience, but if nothing dangerous is happening in the fight, is worth saving your resources, so banking in Death Strikes for something specific later on. But once again, this comes from experience and knowing the fights and all of that good stuff. And finally, is taking in mind your mastery called Blood Shield. A percentage of each Death Strike heal grants you a small physical absorption shield. For the most part, is a background sort of mitigation that you shouldn't care too much about unless you get to really min-maxing your character and have it up during off-tanking before taunting. So when you get hit, you soak up some damage and not have your HP spike as much. But speaking of which, off-tanking, you should try to avoid death striking at all costs. During these moments, you want to try and pull as many resources as you possibly can. Obviously, if you at a cap of runic power, do use a death strike, but if not, pull on those resources and then use them wisely when it is your turn to taunt. You can also get a weak aura to specifically track the amount your death strike is gonna heal. That can sometimes make things easier, so check that down below. As for any other abilities, like Rune Strike, for an example, which I didn't talk about, just use when you blow 3 runes, okay? Try to have it on cooldown at all times, because spending runes does make its cooldown shorter, so you want to maximize its uses. In terms of cooldowns, they are all pretty self-explanatory. Vampiric Blood is extremely powerful CD, especially with Red Thirst, increasing your maximum HP and healing received by 30%, both from you or healers. This is best both used proactively and reactively. So whenever you're about to take some big hit, or when you are pretty low on health and you are in a risk of dying. Icebound Fortitude reduces damage taken, so contrary to Vampiric Blood, you want to use it more proactively. So when you are predicting some big hit, and that 30% damage reduction is gonna help you take all of that damage. You can use it when you are in a risk of dying, of course, but proactively will be the most worthwhile with this cooldown. You have Vampiric Blood for those reactive needs. Rune Tap has a very similar use to Icebound Fortitude, although you can use it fairly more often, so you have to time it right, but again in preparation for some big hit, so proactively. And when I say this is when a boss is casting some ability at you, which are often tracked by DBM or even the cast bar of the enemy. Tombstone has a very similar use to this as well, again proactively in preparation for big hits. As for Anti-Magic Shell, has the same use as the previous abilities, but for magic damage instead. It also generates runic power based on the damage absorbed, so make sure to use it properly for more death strikes. So again, use it proactively and reactively whenever you see magic damage. Now, Dancing Rune Weapon is your most unique CD, and for the most part you're going to use it offensively, which indirectly is going to boost you defensively. The parry chance provided of 40% is amazing, so you can use it defensively, like I said. When there's a lot of mobs or even bosses, you're going to parry a lot to completely mitigate attacks. However, it also duplicates your abilities. So to explain it, let's talk about how to open up with your Blood Decay, where this will make the most sense. So first, when you're doing a pull, using a taunt will be the way to go. Taunt is gonna make sure the boss or mob attacks you, plus while the short debuff is up, you generate extra threat. When closing in to the boss, you want to pop that Dancing Rune Weapon ahead of time before everything. Remember the global cooldown, so try to use it before you actually start attacking. Why? Well, it's duplicating everything that you do. So when you do that next mirror end, it's gonna generate double the amount of Bone Shield charges. Your Blood Boil, which you're also gonna use next, is gonna apply 2 Blood Plagues, and then the subsequent Heart Strikes are gonna generate double the amount of runic power, so you can easily build towards that strikes, plus that parry benefit. So overall, this will be the best way to open up. You're gonna do the most damage while not getting your HP spike like crazy, and immediately get lots of resources to play with. Oh, and also your hemostasis buff from Blood Boils also gets double the stacks when you use Blood Boil. Because of all of these benefits, Dancing Rune Weapon has tons of other uses, defensive and offensive as we talked about, but also you can use it for emergency bone shields, and for an example, as you get double per mirror end, or as extra AoE damage as your Blood Boils hit twice, and so does Heart Strike and applies the 2 dots, so a lot more damage. But speaking of AoE, not much is gonna change here from before. Your priorities stay the same for the most part. You now want to start using Death and Decay on cooldown on 3 targets, but you get the proc so often, mostly gonna use that free one anyway. But remember, your Heart Strike cleaves 5 targets while Death and Decay is up. That's the most important thing coming from D&D, is that cleave, especially if with the Heartbreaker talent, so make sure to pop it before actually using your Heart Strikes. As for the Blood Boils, you might have to use them more often here for threat. This will be your main way to gain set threat on dungeon trash packs, so you might have to use it first before anything, sometimes to just grab them all up. Bone Storm is probably the most fun part about your AoE. Here, you just want to stop using Death Strikes and pull in your runic power up to 100 or close, and then just pop it, and you basically won't die if there's 3 targets or more. The heal and damage is indeed quite OP. And yeah, that covers it all. As for stats and traits and all of that good stuff, here strength slash stamina, basically item level, is usually king, so you're gonna take that. However, haste is very important to you, is a crucial factor in your overall gameplay flow, making it far more smoother and allows for more death strikes in the end. So if there's a haste piece that is 5 item levels below your other non-haste piece, you're generally gonna go for that haste piece, but if it's 10 item levels or more, just go for the item level. Versatility comes soon after, which is pretty self-explanatory. As Blood Decay, you don't get a lot of damage reduction outside of fun use abilities, so getting that passively is a big bonus. As for the traits, you can see on the screen which are the best ones. I'll link down below websites that show you the best traits, but that's for DPS only. The ones stated here on the screen are for general tanking. And speaking of which, down below you can check all the sources I provided for the best traits, the Decay Discord, and some macros, add-ons, all for your own pleasure. And as always, thank you for watching. Do remember to like and subscribe to get more videos like this, and check out my Patreon if you wish to support the channel. Have a fantastic day everyone, and I'll see you all next time. See ya.